Hey there, friends. Welcome to my spooky storytelling adventure. I'm so happy you're here with me today. Get ready because I have a chilling tale just for you about a ghost train that takes riders on a spine-tingling journey. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. If you're listening, don't forget to comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. Also, make sure to subscribe because I have something special just for you. So, grab your popcorn, fluff up your blankets, and let's dive into the world of ghosts and shadowy trains. And remember, click the link in the description below to learn more. Let's get spooky. I remember the first time I heard about the ghost train. I was sitting on my bed one dark and stormy night, rain tapping softly against the windows. My heart raced a little more than usual. I had just settled down with my favorite blanket and a flashlight to read some scary stories when my friend Tommy burst through the door, his eyes wide with excitement. "Have you heard about the ghost train?" he asked, bouncing on his feet. I shook my head, peeking out from under my blanket. My curiosity sparked brighter than the flashlight beam. "There's an old train track in the woods, and they say that if you go there at midnight, you can hear the whistle of the ghost train," Tommy declared, his voice barely above a whisper. "People say it appears out of thin air and goes chugging down the tracks, even though the train hasn't been there for 100 years. I felt a shiver go down my spine, both from the cold and from the thought of a ghostly locomotive appearing in the night. But instead of being scared, I was more excited. What if we could see the ghost train? What if it was real? The next day, Tommy and I decided we had to check it out for ourselves. We packed a small bag with flashlights, some beef jerky, and 2 cans of soda. We promised each other to meet at the edge of the woods just as the sun was going down. The trees looked tall and shadowy, their branches swaying in the wind like spooky arms reaching for us. By the time we reached the old train track, it was almost completely dark. The sun had dipped behind the hills, and the moon peeked out, casting a silvery glow on everything. I could feel a tight knot of excitement in my stomach. This was it. We were doing something brave and thrilling. We walked along the rusty old tracks, listening for any sign of the ghost train. The air was thick with tension, and every little sound made us jump. The rustle of leaves made us stop in our tracks, and the distant hoot of an owl sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly, we heard it, a faint whistle, almost like someone was calling to us from a million miles away. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, gripping Tommy's arm tightly. He nodded, his eyes sparkling with a mix of fear and excitement. Then, out of nowhere, the ground began to shake beneath us. I could feel the reverberation through my feet. The noise got louder. It was like a train was really coming. We turned and faced the direction of the sound, our eyes wide, hearts pounding. Just then, a bright light appeared far down the track, growing brighter and brighter, illuminating everything around us. "It's real! The ghost train is real!" Tommy cried, his voice filled with thrill and fear. When the train finally came into view, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was big and black, with shimmering silver accents that glowed eerily in the moonlight. Wisps of fog rolled around its wheels, and ghostly figures floated in and out of sight through the windows. They looked like they were waving at us, or maybe beckoning us to come closer. My pulse raced to my ears. "Should we get on?" Tommy asked, his eyes gleaming with brave curiosity. I was scared, but the thrill was too strong to resist. "Yes, let's do it," I answered, my voice shaking a little. We stepped towards the train as it slowed, the whistle blowing again, echoing through the chill night air. As we reached the open door, a sudden rush of wind surrounded us. We exchanged a nervous glance, but stepped inside, where the air was strangely warm compared to the cold outside. The inside felt like stepping back in time. Old wooden seats, faded velvet curtains, and the faint smell of smoke. As we took our seats, the door slid shut with a heavy thud. I could feel the train begin to move, but I felt frozen in place, my heart racing. Were we really on a ghost train? I glanced at Tommy, who was staring wide-eyed at the passing scenery, now changing from trees to a thick, swirling mist. The train rumbled through the dark, and I could hear whispers around us. They were soft and haunting, like distant echoes of stories long forgotten. "What do they say?" I murmured, feeling an eerie chill creep down my back. Tommy shrugged, his eyes darting around in fear and awe. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and in the dim glow, I could see the ghostly figures more clearly. Some looked sad, while others seemed to be laughing, but all of them had a spooky glow that sent shivers through my body. I tried to look away, but my eyes were glued to the windows, and I felt myself being pulled into the mystery of it all. Why are they here? I whispered as the train rattled louder. Just then, the train made a sharp turn, and we were thrown against the side. Tommy grabbed my arm tightly. "What if we can't get off?" he asked, his voice filled with panic. The train went faster now, wind howling, our hair flying back. There was something strange about the way the windows seemed to twist and turn. The outside looked like a dreamscape, swirling colors of blue and black, making it hard to tell what was real. "Look!" Tommy shouted, pointing out the window. I turned to see what he was talking about, and a horrifying sight met my eyes. A ghostly figure standing on the tracks, watching us. It was pale with hollow eyes and a grin that stretched too wide across its face. I felt my stomach turn at the sight. Maybe we should have stayed home. I blurted out, panic rising inside me. But before I could say anything more, the figure seemed to wave, and just like that, it dissolved into the darkness. "Where are we going?" I whispered, glancing at the other passengers, who just stared ahead, lost in their own ghostly daze. My heart raced once more. The train wasn't taking us anywhere normal. Moments later, the train screeched to a stop, and the lights flickered again, leaving us in almost complete darkness. A heavy silence fell over the compartment, and I could hear my own heartbeat racing in my ears. Then, a voice broke the silence. "You've come to the haunted train, young travelers. Welcome." It was low and eerie, and it made my blood run cold. I looked at Tommy, whose eyes were wide with fear. Who are you?" I managed to stammer, feeling both frightened and fascinated. "I am the conductor of the ghost train," the voice continued, echoing around us. "It takes brave souls to the realm of spirits, where stories of sorrow and joy are shared with those willing to listen." I saw a flicker of light beneath the door, and the ground trembled again. I could feel the train moving, but it was different now, like we had entered a whole new world. My hand shook as I clutched my flashlight tightly, peering into the darkness that surrounded us. "We will reach the land of lost stories soon. Are you ready?" the ghostly conductor asked, and I felt a gnawing fear deep in my belly. Was I really ready for what was coming? As the train rolled forward, I felt more than just fear. I felt a strange pull towards the unknown, a sense that something magical yet terrifying was waiting for us on the other side. The ghost train brushed through the dark, and I held my breath, wondering if we'd ever find our way back home. Tommy leaned closer to me, his voice barely a whisper. "What if we can't go back? What if we stay here forever?" I felt a shiver sweep over me again, but the thought of an adventure, as thrilling as it was frightening, kept me glued to my seat. As the train continued to rumble through the darkness, we waited, hearts pounding, for whatever awaited us in a land of lost stories, hoping it would be worth the fear, and wishing we could survive to tell the tale. But the world outside the windows had changed completely, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was coming, and we might not be alone on this ghostly ride. With every passing moment, I could feel a story building, a tale woven together with threads of fear and wonder. Little did we know, we were about to face unforgettable adventures and eerie encounters that would haunt us forever. And as the train chugged forward, I held tight, waiting for the next twist in our spine-tingling story. The train rolled onto the dark, surrounded by whispers and shadows, taking us deeper into a realm where anything was possible. I felt my heart racing faster with every passing second. What awaited us in the land of lost stories? Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and a chill swept through the cabin. I looked around at my fellow passengers. Their faces were pale and expressionless, as if they were trapped in a daydream or a nightmare, lost in thoughts we could not understand. I leaned closer to Tommy, who was gripping the armrest as if it was the only thing keeping him from floating away into the eerie night. "Do you feel that?" I whispered. It was as if the air had thickened around us, making it hard to breathe. A low humming filled the space, swelling with anticipation. The sound seemed to wrap itself around us, raising the tiny hairs on the back of my neck. I shivered and felt a wave of unease wash over me. Then, out of the corners of my eyes, I noticed shadows moving beyond the windows. They darted in and out of sight, like fleeting moments of something truly frightening. Each flicker made the darkness feel alive, swirling with secrets and unseen terrors. I couldn't help but lean forward, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the train's steady clattering. In that moment, a voice broke through the humming, piercing the tension. It was a conductor again, his voice a low, echoing whisper rising above the unsettling sounds. Prepare yourselves, dear travelers, for the stories you will hear will shake you to your very core. I felt a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. What did he mean? Suddenly, the train lurched to a halt, and the lights dimmed even more until they were barely a glimmer. The sense of impending doom hung thick in the air, like the calm before a storm. The shadows outside had stopped moving, and an eerie silence filled the compartment. "Are we there?" Tommy asked, his voice trembling slightly, but I didn't have an answer. I was too engrossed in the shadowy figures outside now. From the darkness, vague forms appeared, creeping closer to the windows. I squinted, trying to see more clearly. At first, they looked like old trees, twisted and gnarled, but then I realized they were not trees at all. They were people, ghostly figures dressed in tattered clothes, their faces shrouded in gloom, watching us with hollow eyes that sent chills racing down my spine. I felt Tommy's grip tighten on my arm. "What do they want?" he hissed, fear evident in his voice. "They look sad," I murmured, my heart heavy with empathy. "Maybe they want help?" But even as I spoke, a sense of dread flooded over me. Why were they out here in this realm? Just then, the train's whistle blew again, echoing in the stillness, and broke my thoughts. The door to our compartment swung open with a sharp bang, and a freezing gust of wind rushed in. I shivered, blinking rapidly as the shadows outside shifted and encroached closer. I could feel their eyes on me, tugging at my sense of safety. Then, one brave figure stepped through the door, its form slowly solidifying in the light. My breath caught in my throat. It was a young girl, her hair wild and tangled. Her dress was dirty, and her face streaked with something that looked like dirt, and maybe tears. She looked frightened, but also desperately hopeful. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely louder than a breeze. "You have to help us." Tommy and I exchanged glances of disbelief and terror. "Help you with what?" I asked, my heart pounding so fast I thought it might burst. The girl stepped closer, her eyes wide and pleading. "We are trapped here. The ghost train brings us back and forth, but we can never leave. Listen to our stories. Be brave, and they might set us free." Just as she finished speaking, other figures began to gather behind her, each one looking more desperate than the last. An older man, a small boy, and even a mother holding a baby appeared. Their faces were filled with sorrow, their eyes glimmering with an odd mix of hope and despair. The air grew thicker with their stories waiting to be told, but I could feel dread creeping into my mind. What if we couldn't help them? The girl continued. "We tell our stories every night, but no one listens. Please, let's share with you. The only way to break the curse is to hear the tales of our anguished hearts." I was terrified, but also curious. What had happened to them? What stories lay behind those sad eyes? I glanced at Tommy, who seemed as conflicted as I felt. But before we could respond, the train began moving again, the loud whistle drowning out our thoughts, almost as if the train itself was warning us not to engage. But then the lights flickered one more time, plunging us into darkness again. I could hear the soft sobs of the ghostly passengers now, their stories surfacing like bubbles in a cauldron, begging to be freed. I felt their pain wrap around me like a heavy blanket filled with fear. The train was bringing us deeper into the unknown. "Tommy, what do we do?" I asked, feeling panic rising again. The shadows were closing in on us, whispering and calling, their voices overlapping in a haunting melody of despair. "We can't just leave them." The figure of the girl moved closer, her face illuminated for just a moment by the flickering lights. "You must listen," she urged, her voice trembling with urgency. "If you choose not to, we will all remain trapped here forever." Just then, I felt the weight of her plea pressing down on me, squeezing tightly around my heart. I wanted to help them, but fear tangled around my courage, knotting it into a ball of uncertainty. Maybe listening to a ghost story would be too much. What if they were sad forever? What if our stories entwined with theirs, causing us to become as lost as they were? I'll listen, I finally said, my voice trembling. I instinctively grasped Tommy's arm tighter, as if our friendship could shield me from the creepiness of the train. We'll listen. With those words, the girl smiled faintly, and the shadows around her seemed to thicken, swirling like mist. Thank you. And with that, one by one, each figure began to share their story. The train plunged into deep silence as the first ghostly figure, a weary old woman, spoke of her life, a time long ago when she roamed the earth filled with laughter and joy. But a tragic accident stole her family, leaving her alone to mourn their loss. She told how her heart became heavy and dark, leaving her trapped on the train, forever telling her story to the night. As the woman spoke, I felt the weight of her sorrow wrap around me. The words flowed like a river of grief, each one piercing my heart. I could almost see the world she described, filled with vibrant colors turned gray. I felt tears pooling in my eyes for her pain and sorrow. The boy who followed her spoke of a different kind of sadness, how he'd been lost while playing in the woods, chasing after a butterfly. The ghostly memories flooded in. He didn't understand why he hadn't found his way back home. I could sense his innocence, and it made my heart ache for him. As their stories blended into one another, I could feel Tommy's grip on my arm loosen. He seemed transfixed, absorbed in the tales and heavy with the weight we now bore. But then, something shifted. The shadows grew darker, and the whispers became more frantic. Suddenly, the train jolted again, and the lights began to flicker wildly. I could hear strange sounds echoing around us, a mix of laughter and crying, as if dozens of voices were trapped in turmoil. I felt panic flood in my veins as the ghostly figures looked around in fear. "No, not again," the girl cried. "They're coming." I turned to her, my breath catching in my throat. "Who's coming?" I shouted over the growing noise. "The ones who keep us here," she yelled, her eyes wide with terror. The temperature in the cabin dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. My heart raced as I remembered the shadowy figures outside, the sad souls. Suddenly, the train lurched to a stop again, but this time the atmosphere felt very different. The ghostly figures trembled, and I could sense an overwhelming fear flooding through them. "Hold on tight," I shouted to Tommy, who looked just as afraid as I felt. The train began to shake violently, the lights blinking faster until they turned completely off, plunging us into a dark void. I couldn't see anything but the glimmers of ghostly figures surrounding us. The whispers turned into wails, and I felt the air grow thick with anguish. "They're here!" The girl screamed and darted toward the door, but she vanished into the shadows, a fleeting figure lost again in the night. My heart thundered as the shadows leaped forward from the gloom outside. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could sense their presence swirling around us, reaching for us, hungry and desperate. Our ride on the ghost train was no longer just an adventure. It had turned into a nightmare, and I had no idea how to escape. "Tommy, what do we do?" I shouted, panic rising inside me like a volcanic eruption. The shadows were closing in, their whispers increasing in volume, merging into a terrifying chorus of voices. But before Tommy could respond, a blinding light erupted through the cabin, startling us both. It filled every corner, illuminating the ghostly figures and casting the shadows back into the darkness. Anyone daring enough to face the stories of the haunted should remain strong in their choices. The conductor's voice echoed, booming through the light like thunder. This path to the land of lost stories is both a curse and a choice. As I squinted toward the light, I realized the shadows shifted, faltered at the brightness, but kept circling closer, trying to escape its glow. I could feel the fear of the trapped souls pressing down on me like a weight, and I knew we had one last chance. "Tommy, listen to their stories again," I urged, my voice full of determination. "If we hear them all, maybe we can help them and find a way home." The brightness surrounded us, and in that moment, as the shadows danced in their frantic state, I felt a spark of hope igniting within me. If we listened and faced our fears, perhaps we could free them in ourselves. With renewed conviction, Tommy nodded, and we turned to figures, resolute in our decision. One by one, they began again, spilling their tales into the air, a desperate but beautiful thread of stories weaving together as we braced ourselves against the dark. But would our efforts be enough? Could we truly help them escape? My heart raced as the train began to move again, taking us down the path of the unknown, deeper into an adventure that promised to challenge us like never before. The air thickened with desperation as the ghostly figures began to share their stories again. Each tale spilled forth like a torrent of lost hopes, filling the cabin with emotions that sent shivers down my spine. I clutched Tommy's arm tighter, aware that we were submerged in something that went far beyond mere fear, something that spoke of suffering, regret, and longing. The first figure to take the floor was the old woman again, her face radiant with the glow of memories long buried beneath the weight of grief. She spoke of her vibrant youth, of laughter that danced in the air like sunlight, but her voice soon darkened, shifting from joy to sorrow as she recounted the day fate turned against her. "They were taken from me," she whispered, her eyes misty with unshed tears. A storm came. Lightning struck our home. In the blink of an eye, I lost everything I held dear. As she spoke, I could feel a chill crawling over my skin like a spider skittering across my arm. The train rattled in response to her memories, as if even the vehicle itself understood the weight of her pain. I imagined the storm raging outside her house, the thunder crashing like a monster looming over her life, and it made my stomach churn. I wanted to help her, to wrap her in comfort, but I felt utterly helpless. When she finished, a heavy silence fell on the next figure. The small boy stepped forward, clutching his toy, a worn-out bear with one eye missing. "I was in the woods," he said softly, his voice quivering. "I wanted to find treasure, like in the stories. I thought I was brave, but I got lost." The image of him wandering alone struck me hard. I could see him in the tall, dark trees, surrounded by shadows, calling out for someone to come find him. "I waited for someone to help me," he continued, his eyes brimming with fear. "But nobody came. I called and called until my voice was too tired to speak." I felt tears sting my eyes as I imagined the horror of being an innocent child lost in such a frightening place, the echo of his cries lost in the night. Just then, a gust of wind swept through the cabin, whipping my hair around my face and stirring spirits from the shadows. I barely noticed it until I caught a glimpse of the faces in the darkness, twisted with envy and yearning. They seemed to covet the chance to share their own tormented tales, the very air heavy with their unfinished business. The next figure was a mother, her arms cradling an invisible baby, rocking back and forth, lost in her own sorrow. "I loved her so much," she wept, the sound echoing like a siren wail through the train. "But I never got to hold her. She was taken from me too soon." The imagery was unbearable. I could almost feel the warmth of that lost baby, the soft coos of innocence that would never be heard. I looked at Tommy, whose face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead as he absorbed the heavy weight of their stories. Then, a dark shadow swept across the outside of the train, breaking my concentration. I turned to look and felt my heart race. There was something moving outside, a figure cloaked in darkness, watching us from the edge of the mist. It seemed monstrous, something twisted and unnatural, shrouded in sorrow. I shuddered, feeling the urgency of the moment pressing down as I turned back to figures. It was clear that we were not alone. In the middle of grieving stories, I heard the whispers come to crescendo as the girl who led us here reappeared, her features marked by anxiety. "You must listen to them all. Only then will you understand," she implored urgently, as panic spread through my chest like wildfire. Tears glistened in her eyes, mirroring the desperation we all felt. At that moment, the shadows outside surged like angry waves, clawed at the windows, screaming out their own torment. "Let us go," they howled in a chorus of rage, the sound striking fear deep into my bones. My pulse raced, a primal instinct telling me to flee from this place, but something deep within cried out for us to stay and listen. Just as the wails grew louder, the last figure stepped forward, a tall man with haunted eyes and a menacing aura. "I am the keeper of lost souls," he said, his voice deep and slow. "I was once like you, but now I am bound to this train." The figure stared into my soul, and I felt as if he could see my deepest fears. "You think you can help them?" he continued, an unsettling grin spreading across his face. "Help them escape? This is all part of the curse. Trapped in a loop of pain." His words struck me hard, a wave of anxiety crashing over me. Could we really help them? Or were we simply weaving ourselves into their nightmares? "No, it can't be," I shouted, suddenly filled with anger and determination. "No one should have to suffer like this forever. We can listen and help." My voice wavered, and for a moment, uncertainty bloomed within me. But then I thought of all their aching stories, the bonds we shared through loss, and my resolve solidified. The tall man laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the train. "You can try, but remember, not all stories have happy endings." And with that, he raised a hand, and shadows burst forth from the darkness, swirling like a ravenous storm as the train shook violently. "A curse must be broken with courage," he roared, his voice mingling with the screams of the lost souls outside, their energy coalescing into a whirlwind of anguish. I could feel it tugging at me, wanting to pull me into its depths, but I refused to let go. "Keep listening," Tommy urged, grabbing my hand. We needed to remain strong. This was our opportunity to help them break free. As the keeper's chilling laughter echoed around us, I turned back to the ghostly figures. My heart pounded with the fear of what would come next. The old woman stepped up before us once more, her voice trembling but clear. "We all have our regrets, but sharing them is the only way to set us free." I could feel the weight of her words as they filled the cabin, bearing down like an avalanche of grief. The shadows swirled wildly outside the windows, tapping frantically against the glass as if they wanted to break through. My heart raced with every thud, and a deep, dark dread clawed at my insides. The more we listened, the more powerful their tales seemed to become. Suddenly, a flash of blinding light illuminated the cabin once more, and in that moment, I could see the true faces of the figures around us, haggard, sad, and filled with fear. All at once, I understood that these ghostly beings represented not just loss, but a warning. The deeper we delved into their stories, the stronger the pull became, threatening to drag us into their timeless suffering. "You must face the truth," the keeper shouted, his voice booming with authority. "Only then can the darkness be banished." The train lurched again, rattling violently, and I felt a profound sense of urgency rush through me. "Tommy, we can't back down now," I declared, even as doubt bubbled beneath the surface. The shadows were growing more frantic, as though the figures were desperate to be heard, while the keeper's laughter rang ominously, echoing my own fears. The stories began to intertwine, a cacophony of pain and longing overwhelming my senses. I felt my emotions dance chaotically with each revelation, heart pounding with every word that echoed in the cramped, dark space. The fear pressed sharply against me, becoming a living entity, slowly suffocating my hope. "Focus," I urged, my voice trembling but determined. "We need to finish hearing them." As we listened, the faintest glimmers of hope began to shine through the shadows. But in that moment, I could sense the gravity of the situation. If we failed, we might not only lose our own chance to escape, but we could become part of the darkness forever. And as I looked again at the storm of shadows outside, and at the keeper's unwavering gaze, I knew the true battle was just beginning. Will we find a way to break the curse, or become just another thread in the tapestry of lost souls that haunted this ghost train? The train roared forward into the unknown, speeding deeper into the haunting abyss, and we clung to our courage as we faced the stories that could save us or consume us entirely. I could feel the swirling shadows outside clawing against the windows like restless spirits, desperate for release. The air grew heavier, thick with the sorrow of the souls packed inside the train with us. I began to feel the weight of their pain pressing down on my chest, squeezing harder with every heartbeat. Their stories filled the space around us, making it feel like we were being smothered by memories of grief and regret. As the train rattled onward, I glanced at Tommy, who looked pale and shaken. I felt a rush of determination wash over me. We couldn't give in to fear. We had to keep listening. But as I turned back to the figures, I noticed the atmosphere changing. A dreadful stillness settled over the cabin, almost suffocating, and I could hear the faintest whispers echoing throughout the darkness. "Help us," they whispered, their voices threading through the silence like a chilling breeze. I felt a shiver slide down my spine, cold and unwelcome. "You must pay attention. Our tales hold the key." The urgency of their pleas stung my ears, and my hands shook as I grasped Tommy's arm for support. The boy with the teddy bear started to speak once more, but this time his voice became a haunting drawl, dragging out each word as if he were teetering on the edge of despair. I saw a shadow stand between the trees, far away. It watched me, waited for me to wander too close. His eyes looked wild, filled with a terror that felt all too familiar. I could feel it wanting to pull me into the woods. Every time I turned back, it moved closer. A chill raced through me as I imagined that shadow lurking just beyond the leafy veil, its claws ready to snatch the boy away. The train jolted suddenly, and I gasped, feeling a wave of dread wash over me. The air grew thick with darkness, and I could almost see the shadow moving closer, creeping toward the windows as the boy's story unfolded. "What happened next?" I asked, my voice shaky but carrying a desperate need for answers. "Did you manage to escape?" "My friends found me, but when the light came, it took them instead," he continued, his voice trembling. "They vanished into the trees while I stood frozen in fear, screaming, but no one heard me." The revelation hit me like ice water. I blinked hard as images swirled in my head. Lost children becoming part of that wretched forest. What if we're trapped too? I thought, panic clawing at my insides. Those who are lost become the lost. The keeper's voice rang out, echoing through the swirling memories. "Their pain is eternal, and so must yours be if you do not break the cycle." With those words, the energy in the train shifted again, dark and oppressive. It felt as if thousands of eyes were watching us, threatening to snatch us into the darkness if we faltered. I could see the other figures shift uncomfortably under the weight of their trauma, trying to find solace in their sorrow. The mother stepped forward again, her empty eyes locking onto mine, and I felt my breath catch. "I thought I'd never see her again," she said, her voice quivering with barely contained sorrow. But I began to see shadows in the corners of my vision, hear her laughter echoing when it shouldn't have. She paused, staring into the distance, as if reaching for something just out of grasp. Then one sweet night, I saw her. I thought it was a dream. She danced in the pale moonlight, and I ran to her, but she turned away and vanished. "Don't say her name," shouted the boy, panic spreading across his face. "It attracts them." Suddenly, the shadows outside writhed in response, surging against the glasses of Alive. The air crackled with a menacing energy, and I felt the temperature drop sharply. Why are they so interested? I wondered, knowing there were things I didn't yet understand. The tall man, the keeper of lost souls, stretched out a hand toward the small boy. "You felt their presence. You are bound by the curse." The words dripped with ominous resonance, hanging heavily in the air. "No!" I shouted, afraid of what this might mean. "We're not lost. We can help." The man's laughter rumbled through the cabin, dark and resonant. "Help? You can only share in their suffering. There is no escape from the truth." His voice spun around me, heavy as if it were a web tightening around my mind. Just then the lights flickered, and I saw brief flashes of the faces outside, twisted expressions, mouths contorted in silent screams. I willed myself to look away, my heart racing faster. The stories were becoming too real now, each word twisting in my gut like a barbed wire. "Listen," called the girl, her voice breaking through the haze. "You have to find the essence of their stories. That's how you'll understand." "But what if the truth is too much to bear?" I asked, fear creeping into the corners of my mind. "It is the only way," she insisted, her eyes alight with a fierce determination. "You can't give in to despair." As I started to listen again, the stories began to rain down more heavily than before. Each figure spoke with renewed urgency, their words crashing into each other like waves in a storm. Each tale became more desperate, more intense, shaking the very foundation of our fears. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain on my wrist, a powerful tug that drew my attention. I looked down, horrified to see dark fingers gripping me tightly, ghostly and chilling. I gasped, struggling to break free, and the fingers seemed to pulse with life of their own, pulling me toward the darkness that waited beyond the thin veil of light. No! I screamed, fighting with everything in me. Tommy grabbed my other arm, pulling me back into the safety of the light. "Hold on!" he shouted, panic in his voice as he wrestled against the unseen force. The other figures around us gasped, their own faces racked with horror. "Don't let them take you!" the old woman cried. "You must face the darkness." With a final effort, I closed my eyes and focused on the stories. I was determined not to succumb to their pull, but to understand a fragile thread connecting us all, trembling wildly in the storm of despair. "Tell them," I shouted into chaos, my voice strong amid the swirling shadows. "Tell them everything." The figures nodded, their faces filled with fierce resolve as they began recounting their darkest memories with renewed strength. I forced myself to listen, determined to absorb every word, every sorrowful detail. Even when the fingers gripped tighter, I wrapped myself in their stories, hoping they would guide us toward a way out. "Together we are stronger," I shouted, clenching Tommy's hand tighter as I embraced the pain of their recollections. "We can break the curse." The air crackled with energy as their tales neared a crescendo, words blending into a haunting melody laden with anguish, rising to a fever pitch. The shadows outside the train began to scream, wails piercing through the night, drowning everything in an overwhelming wave of despair. Then I noticed something shift. The figures were fading, their forms becoming hazy. The old woman's voice pierced through the chaos, clear and unwavering. "In the end, we are all one. Our stories are tied together by grief and love." The keeper's laughter turned to rage, a dark storm brewing around us. He began to pace, his shadow growing larger, consuming the light. "You think you can unravel the curse?" he taunted, but I sensed a hesitancy in his voice. "You're still consumed by fear. It will always bind you." But, feeling the strength of the figure's stories enveloping me, I realized something profound. Fear cannot hold power over love and understanding. I called out, my voice a beacon amid the turmoil. "We are not just hearers. We are the storytellers. Our courage can set you free." With that declaration, a powerful light surged through the train. The shadows stopped, quieted by the brilliance emanating from the hearts of the figures. They filled me with strength, intertwining their long-held grief into a tapestry of hope. "Keep going," Tommy urged as the light intensified, piercing through the darkness that threatened to engulf us. I joined the other voices, our pain coalescing into a force strong enough to challenge the keeper's wrath. In that moment, I felt the stories come alive, swirling around me, binding us together in an unbreakable bond of love, grief, and resilience, pushing back against the darkness. But as we reached the light, the shadows roared in defiance, the keeper's fury rippling through us. Would our newfound strength be enough to break the chains of despair? As we pressed forward, embracing the energy that flowed from each tale, I began to hope that we could indeed find a path back to the light. But even as I clung to that hope, the reality weighed heavily upon me. There was still darkness lurking just beyond the fringes of our shared stories. Still, we would not falter. Not now. Not when everything hung in the balance, and the sound of our unified voices threatened to shatter the very fabric of the curse that bound us all together. The ghost train surged on, and we were determined to face whatever lay ahead. The light intensified, wrapping around us like a protective cocoon, but the shadows outside didn't back down. As the figures began to join their voices, I could feel the air crackle with tension. Each story flooded the cabin, mixing together into a powerful force, but also stirring something ancient and dark. Suddenly, I heard a wail that pierced through the chorus, sharp and desperate. It was a mother again, and her pain filled every corner of the train. "You don't understand. They want us to suffer. They feed off our despair." Her eyes widened as she spoke, a frantic look that sent chills racing through my veins. "If we don't escape soon, they will take us too." As her words sunk in, I glanced toward the window. The shadows had transformed, twisting and writhing, forming grotesque shapes that press against the glass, trying to break through. I noticed for the first time details in the darkness. faces contorted in agony, mouths open in silent screams, eyes bulging with sorrow as deep as the abyss. The realization hit me hard. They wanted us to feel what they felt, to share in their suffering, dragging us down with them into despair. Keep telling your stories. I shouted, desperate to drown out the wailing, my heart racing as I felt the shadows inch closer. We'll break this curse together. I leaned into the warmth of the light, drawing strength from the souls around me. The tall man, the keeper, suddenly stepped forward, his shadow looming against the walls, reaching for me like greedy fingers. You think love and hope can conquer darkness? You are foolish. His laughter echoed, a chilling sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. You will see, feel the truth of their pain. Just then, I caught a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. A dark shape darted outside, far too fast to be human. It was swirling around the train, its form shifting and blending with the shadows, becoming a part of the cries that surrounded us. "Don't look," shouted the boy, his face pale and terrified. "It sees you. It feeds on fear and regret." But it was too late. I felt its icy breath crawl over my skin, the chill seeping into my bones, sending waves of dread through me. I clenched my teeth, fighting the urge to look outside, but an unseen force pulled at my gaze, a primal curiosity that clawed at my mind. With all my strength, I focused on the voices of the figures surrounding me. Each story was woven together now, binding us tight in a shared struggle. I could hear the pain in the old woman's voice, the deep sorrow she felt for what was lost. We've all held our regrets. It's time to put them to rest. I squeezed Tommy's hand tightly, attempting to ground myself. We can't let them win, I declared, my voice steady despite the shaking dread in my core. We must find a way to release their spirits. The shadows began to swirl violently outside, mocking our efforts. A cacophony of voices rose in response, the air thickening with despair as I felt the shadows trying to snuff out the warmth of our light. Then something shifted. The old woman stepped forward, taking a deep breath. There's a reason we are bound to this train. There's a connection that ties our tales together. It's not too late to change it. Her voice grew more powerful, more filled with resolve. If we share the truth, we can finally break free. I felt a spark ignite within me as her words struck a chord of determination deep in my heart. "Tell me how," I shouted, trying to drown out the voices of despair. "The stories bind us," she cried, eyes sparkling with determination, though fear lingered in her gaze. "We must face the keeper and give our tales true meaning. Only then can we release the chains of this curse." Suddenly, a shriek erupted from the shadows, piercing through the air, shaking the very foundations of the train. I jumped as a ghostly figure lunged toward the window, its hands clawing at the barrier, face twisted in agony. "Let us out! Let us go!" it begged, but the hunger in its gaze made my stomach churn. I felt something cold grip my heart. "They are desperate," Tommy murmured beside me, his voice trembling. "They want to take us with them." The train lurched again, and I felt myself being pulled toward the window. Panic surged within me as the weight of the darkness pressed down harder, scrabbling at my mind like insects, buzzing with insistent whispers. "Stay strong," I shouted, squeezing Tommy's hand harder, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine. "We can do this. We can help them." As if in response, the figures began to gather their strength. Their stories surged around us like a cyclone, ripping through the cabin. The darkness outside seemed to hesitate momentarily, taken aback by our resolve. With every word filling the air, I felt the oppressive presence of the keeper shift, his laughter faltering slightly as a cacophony swelled. Each figure spoke, their voices layered, overlapping, weaving together in a beautiful tapestry of hope amidst despair. But then I felt it, a tearing pain in my chest, as if the darkness was trying to pull me apart from the inside. The shadows outside shrieked, swirling violently against the windows, clawing at the frames, trying to break through. I could see their twisted faces contorted in a desperate frenzy. They're scared. I gasped, understanding dawning on me. They fear being forgotten. With that clarity, I turned to the others, my heart racing. They need to be remembered. Tell me everything. The good, the bad, the moments that made you smile. And so they began, slowly at first, but their tales spilled forth like a flood, drowning the darkness in memories of love and resilience. The shadows howled in agony as their grip on me weakened, and I felt the hot rush of tears stinging my eyes, mixing with determination. The boy with the bear spoke of laughter in the sun, the warmth of his mother's embrace, and the joy of friendship. One by one, we began to share brighter moments, each memory a dagger piercing through the encroaching shadows. But in the midst of it all, the keeper's shadow loomed larger, dark and terrifying, drawn to our light like a moth to a flame. "You think this will save you?" he howled, the fury in his voice shaking the very air. "You cannot escape the darkness that binds you." I felt my heart race, sensing the urgency weighing down on us. Together, I shouted, my voice soaring above the chaos. "Let's face him as one." With newfound strength, the figures and I stood shoulder to shoulder, united in purpose. The energy around us felt electric, a powerful current coursing through our veins. "You may be darkness, but we have the power of our stories." I roared, leading the charge of voices, our stories colliding, resonating with fierce determination. The very fabric of the night trembled, the shadows shrieking as they twisted and churned, fighting against our collective light. It was as if we had forged a shield, illuminating the darkest corners with our memories. But then, just as victory seemed within reach, the shadows surged forward with renewed fury, crashing like a wave against our fragile barrier. The keeper's voice boomed, a roar of thunder that echoed through the darkness. "You cannot defeat what you fear most." Suddenly, a mist began to fill the cabin, thick and suffocating, swirling around us like an inescapable fog. I struggled to breathe, fighting against the sensation that I was fading with the light. "Stand firm," I shouted, my voice spurred by instinct. "We must hold on to each other." And as the mist swirled with malevolent energy, I clasped Tommy's hand tighter, feeling the physical connection grounding me against the pervasive fear. The stories of the souls around us began to glow, illuminating the space, carving out a protective sphere where love and light pushed back against the darkness. Within that circle, I felt hope rising, a flicker of resistance that would not be snuffed out. I focused on the strong, warm feelings shared between us, determined to push back against the keeper's hold. But the shadows retaliated fiercely, rushing toward us, flying through cracks beneath the windows like howling banshees. "You will join our lament," they shrieked, their voices a cacophony of anguish that rattled my bones and made my heart race. We wouldn't let it win. I felt the energy within me surge as I shouted louder, rallying the spirits to let go of their pain and embrace their strength. "We are not just our regrets. We are also our joys. Let your voices rise." The silhouettes around us brightened, their faces full of fierce determination. One by one, they began to chant, their voices combating the darkness, forging a new reality. It was overwhelming, a beautiful chaos that stretched into the vast unknown. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The darkness clawed at the edges of my mind, whispering doubts and fears. But I refused to give in. I focused on the warmth of Tommy's hand, the strength of the gathered souls, and the power of the shared stories rising to a fever pitch. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted, cutting through the mist like a sword, illuminating the train and the spirits trapped within. The keeper reeled back, his face twisted in rage and disbelief as our light grew stronger, weaving a tapestry of memories that swirled around us. And in that moment, I felt the fear begin to melt away. The spirits began to change, their shapes becoming lighter, less burdened. Faces of joy emerged now, memories of laughter and triumph shining through the darkness. They stepped forward, courage swelling inside them, refusing to be shackled by despair any longer. "We reclaim our stories," they shouted, voices unified, piercing through the oppressive fog, echoing through the train and into the night. With the shadows retreating and the keeper's grasp weakening, I realized we were on the verge of breaking free. But the struggle wasn't over yet. What lay ahead was still a maze of fear and uncertainty. As the mist began to clear, I felt the weight of the curtain slowly rise around us, revealing the path ahead dotted with flickering lights. The train gave a sudden jolt, propelling us into the unknown, and my heart raced with both fear and anticipation. Will we find the exit from this curse? Or will the darkness grip us once more? As the echoes of our stories intertwined in the air, I held my breath, knowing the end was drawing near. But I also felt a promise buried deep within. The promise of release, the promise that we might just find our way home again. But first, we had to confront the Keeper, face our fears, and unleash the true power of our shared stories. And as the path ahead twisted into darkness once more, I stood ready, fueled by the hope that had grown stronger with every heart-wrenching tale, determined to fight for every soul that had lost its way. The air grew thicker as the Keeper's presence loomed larger, a shadow twisting and contorting in the light, fury radiating from him like heat from a fire. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as his piercing gaze fixed on me, an icy grip squeezing my heart. "You think you can escape? You are all mine," he bellowed, his voice echoing to the train like thunder rumbling across a stormy sky. I felt an overwhelming wave of fear crash over me. His words sank deep, wrapping around my thoughts like vines. What if he's right? I thought, panic swelling in my chest. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. Pale, wide-eyed, trembling. I shook my head, trying to dispel the dark thoughts. "Stay focused," Tommy whispered urgently, his voice piercing to the haze of uncertainty. He had that fierce look in his eyes, the determination of someone unwilling to back down. I inhaled deeply, forcing myself to hold on to that glimmer of hope. We had come too far to back down. The Keeper raised an arm, and the shadows responded, swirling violently around him, hungry and eager, ready to swallow us whole. I felt the chill seep into my bones, wrapping around my heart, urging me to give in, to let go. Every tale we had shared began to flicker like a dying flame, the darkness threatening to extinguish our stories and the strength we had built together. Then the old woman took a step forward, her voice steady and strong. "Our stories are our power. We break the curse together." Her words pierced through the swirling shadows like a dagger, reigniting the fire inside me. I could feel the spirits gather behind her, their energy pulsing with resilience. "Listen to her," I shouted, my voice rising above the chaos. "Our stories are filled with love, heartache, and bravery. This is our moment to reclaim what we've lost." I turned to face the Keeper, the weight of his darkness pressing down, but I refused to be crushed. Suddenly, the train lurched violently to one side, rattling us in our seats, the eerie sound of metal creaking echoing in my ears. I stumbled, grabbing the edge of the seat for balance. As I looked out the window, panic surged through me again. The landscape outside was changing. Jagged cliffs and twisted trees sped past, morphing into grotesque shapes that seemed to leer at us. "Hold on tight," Tommy yelled, grabbing my arm. "Don't let go." The train seemed to be plunging into darkness, speeding faster and faster as the shadows coiled around us, tightening like a noose. I felt my breath quicken, fear flooding back in as I caught glimpses of distorted faces press against the glass, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. They were lost souls trying to escape the Keeper's grip, and in that moment, I understood the depth of their sorrow, their desire to be free. "We can help you," I shouted at the faces, desperation lacing my voice. "We won't abandon you." But the darkness only laughed, an echoing sound like nails scraping against metal, mocking my pleas. "You won't save them, nor yourselves. You share their despair." The Keeper's words slithered through the air, taunting, making my heart race even faster. As the train continued to shake violently, I grasped onto the hope swirling around me. I could feel the spirits rallying, their whispers merging into a crescendo, pushing against the impending darkness. Together, I screamed, fueling my voice with their energy. "We are more than fear. Our stories can light the way." The air became electric, vibrating with raw energy as the shadows around the Keeper hesitated, flickering. I saw the figures shift behind him, their forms wavering, caught between despair and a fleeting glimpse of hope. "Release yourselves," I urged. "Join us." The Keeper's shadows thrashed, swirling aggressively, pushing back against our united voice. I felt the pull of his darkness tugging at my very essence, attempting to drag me down into the pit of despair. "You cannot win," he shouted, his eyes narrowing dangerously. This is what I thrive on. But something deep within me ignited, a surge of courage mixed with anger at the injustice unfolding. "You do not define us." I cried out, feeling the strength of my voice harmonize with the spirits around me. "We will not be your prisoners." With each word, I felt a warmth spreading through me, the collective stories of love and redemption weaving a tapestry of light that started pushing back against the darkness. Then suddenly, time slowed. The walls of the train began to pulse, and the very air rippled with energy, a whirling storm of light and shadow fighting for dominance. The cabin was alive with memories, laughter, love, loss, that painted vibrant images in the air around us, dancing like fireflies in the night. Faces of the lost souls grew clearer, their expressions shifting from deep sorrow to expressions of hope as they joined our chorus. A ghostly figure stepped forward, its face illuminating with the light of 1,000 memories. "Together we are stronger," it declared, and the air sparkled with its resolve. The keeper stumbled back, rage twisting his features. "No!" he screamed, his voice piercing like shards of glass. The very fabric of the shadows began to tear, scattering like smoke against the powerful light surrounding us. Emboldened, I pressed forward. "Tell your stories. We will not let fear bind us. We will rise." I felt my heart race as the figures joined in a chorus of voices, each tale intertwined with the others, creating a symphony, New York of resilience that obliterated the oppressive darkness. But the keeper roared in anger, the shadows swirling around him like a tempest, trying desperately to reclaim the power that was slipping from his grasp. I could see his form weakening, dark tendrils of despair unraveling like frayed ropes under our united strength. "Don't let up," Tommy shouted beside me, his voice steady with determination. "We're almost there." Just as I prepared to lend my voice again, the keeper lashed out, releasing a surge of darkness that poured over us like a suffocating fog. I gasped, struggling to breathe as the air grew dense and charged with nightmares. Visions flickered before me, twisted reflections of my fears, failures, regrets, lost moments. They clawed at my spirit, whispering vile doubts, trying to drain the courage that had built within me. "Face the truth," the keeper taunted, his voice curling like smoke around my mind. "You cannot escape who you are." But the flickers of light from the souls surged stronger, intertwining with their tales and merging with my own memories. I clung to them, feeling their warmth igniting a fire within. I am not just my fears. I am every moment of joy. I am survival. I shouted, channeling my thoughts into a shield against the keeper's nightmare. Suddenly, the cabin erupted into a kaleidoscope of memories, swirling colors and ethereal lights flooding the dark space, pushing back against the encroaching shadows. I could feel the collective energy building, as if the very essence of our souls was battling against the darkness. "Don't falter," the old woman cried, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "Keep fighting. They need us to remember." As we fought, the train gave another violent lurch, and I felt myself being thrown against the wall, knocking the breath out of me. The shadows writhed, angry and desperate. I blinked away tears, gasping for air, and pushed through the pain as the keeper's rage erupted around me. "Do you think you can win?" he screamed, shadows spiraling around him like a cyclone. "You're all doomed. You're just feeding the darkness." But even as his taunts echoed, I sensed something shifting. The figures began to merge back into an ethereal shape, growing bigger, more radiant even as the gloom clawed at their edges. They had become something else, an army of light determined to break free. "Now!" I shouted, overwhelmed by the newfound strength surging through us. "Tell your stories." All of them. And with final push, the cabin filled with a blinding light that pierced through the gloom, illuminating all faces, both grim and joyful, echoing through the universe. I felt the warmth wrap around me, wrapping me in a cocoon of hope and light. The keeper screamed, his power breaking against our light wave, shadows scattering like ashes in the wind. I felt the pull of the darkness falter, the suffocating weight lifting as I basked in the luminescence surrounding me. But just as I thought we could claim victory, there was a sudden silence that sent a jolt through me, an eerie pause hanging in a room like a dam poised to break. I sensed the fear creeping back, heart hammering as I faced the reality of what lay ahead. What if the keeper had one last trick up his sleeve? Would he return in a more powerful form? I knew, in that silence, we were on a precipice, waiting for the unseen to emerge from the depths of the darkness once more. Something primal stirred within me, an instinct to prepare, to ready ourselves for whatever lurked beyond. But would we be strong enough to face it together? As I stood there surrounded by light and the spirits of the lost, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battle was yet to come. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as the eerie silence enveloped us, hanging heavy in the air like a thick fog. I closed my eyes for a moment, waiting for that overwhelming darkness to crash over us again. But there was only the soft glow of light from the spirits around me, flickering like candles in a stiff wind. The keeper's fury was palpable, and even though we had pushed him back, I sensed his anger simmering just below the surface, ready to erupt. What now? I thought, my breath hitching as I scanned the room, looking for any sign of movement. The tension was unbearable, every muscle in my body taut like a drawn bowstring. Then, slowly, a shadow began to stretch, slithering along the floor, creeping towards me. No! I gasped, my voice barely a whisper in the tense silence. The darkness was crawling back, like a living thing, wiggling and twisting, trying to wrap itself around my ankles. I could feel the shadows tugging at me, try to pull me down into their freezing depths, call my name in a chilling whisper. My own voice echoed back, taunting me. I staggered backward, desperation clawing at my throat as I fought to break free. Fight it! You can't take me! I yelled, summoning every ounce of will I had within me. I could see the shapes of the spirits flicker, their faces full of anguish, watching me with wide eyes, urging me to stand strong. In the flickering light, I noticed one of the spirits, an old man with a kind face, take a step forward. You must remember, child, fear is simply a shadow. It can only take you if you let it. His voice resonated, and the room was suddenly full of warmth. I felt the truth of his words seep into me, pushing back against the shadows wrapping around my legs. He's right, I thought, focusing hard. I won't let fear define me. With that thought, I pushed against the darkness with everything I had. I could feel the weight of the shadows' grip slackening, and I remembered the stories we had shared. Tales of courage, love, and survival. I summoned them up in my mind, each memory brightening the darkness around me. But then, a chilling scream sliced through the air, echoing off the walls, causing the spirits to recoil in terror. "Don't let it win!" the keeper roared, as the shadows twisted into shapes of horrific faces, each one screaming in agony, each one filled with darkness and despair. A wave of dread washed over me, paralyzing my thoughts. The faces were unlike anything I had ever seen, eyes sunken into skull-like forms, mouths stretched wide in eternal screams, reaching out to me as if they wanted to pull me into their torment. "Stay strong," I shouted again, but my voice fell hollow against the overwhelming noise that filled the cabin. The shadows began to swarm over us, curling around my throat like fingers, squeezing tighter and tighter. Tommy yelled something, fighting against the tide of despair, grabbing my arm, pulling me back into the warmth of the spirits. The old man nodded at me, and I could see he had only one chance. Together, I urged, looking at each spirit, willing them to join in. We are not alone. We have our stories. And as their voices rose in a collective power, I felt a shift, a surge of energy that forced the darkness back just a little bit more. I could see the icy doubt in the keeper's eyes flickering, and I took that as a sign. Then suddenly, the blinded light exploded all around us. The shadows writhed and hissed, cracking like fragile glass in the intensity of our hope. But it wasn't over yet. A thick black fog surged forward, advancing, suffocating, threatening to reclaim everything we had fought for. "Hold on," I shouted, bracing myself as if preparing for impact. The blackness crept in, twisting and curling, seeping into the cracks of our light, aiming straight for my heart. I could feel my strength being sapped, the energy of despair wrapping around me, threat, aiming to pull me under. Just then, I remembered the laughter of my younger self, the moments that sparked joy, and the shared happiness of friends and family. Those memories shimmered like starlight, and I concentrated on them, letting them fuel my fire. I did not notice at first that the keeper was growing agitated. His shadow flickered in and out like a flame, wavering with disbelief. "You think childish memories can defeat me?" he hissed, the corners of his mouth curling into a snarl. "I thrive on your fear. I am your greatest nightmare." Suddenly, the figure behind him began to scream, the darkness creeping ever closer to his form, craving his essence. They were pulling him apart. His own shadows had turned against him, crying out for freedom. And then it happened. A rift opened up behind the keeper, a void of singing light and darkness that howled with lost spirits. The wails echoed in my ears, clawing at my mind as the keeper tried to maintain his form, but the shadows around him surged uncontrollably, dragging him toward the light. "No!" he roared, scratching against the walls of the cabin, trying to regain control as he was pulled away. "You cannot do this. You're nothing but memories." I felt a chill of terror crawl down my spine, the very idea that he could come back, more powerful than before. Just as I thought about it, the air around me began to shift, cracking under the pressure of hidden fears. As he wailed, I found strength within me, recalling the faces that I had fought for, the spirits caught in limbo, their eyes filled with hope. "Fight back, everyone," I shouted, reaching out. "We won't let him take us. We are not afraid." The figure surged forward with one final rallying cry, and I joined in, directing all my strength toward the keeper. "You will not take them. You will not take any of us." My voice was fierce, almost a roar, and the light surged brighter, washing over everything. With a burst of energy, the keeper was swept into the rift, his shadowy form distorting and twisting in a chaotic dance. The sound of his screams echoed painfully around us, fading into the bright light that consumed him. I watched as the spirits joined together, weaving their stories into a shield of warmth and light. The old man smiled at me, and I knew we could find the way back. The darkness may have been strongest, but together we had pushed back against it, forcing it into retreat. But then the light flickered, as if a flame was sputtering against the wind, and dread hollowed out my stomach like a pit. I could sense the air beginning to chill again, shadows rising in the corners of the train car. Not yet, I thought desperately, knowing the keeper could return. My pulse raced, knowing we had only just begun to the fight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was still lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. I glanced at Tommy, who looked back with fear and determination flickering like the light around us. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, but behind it was a burning resolve. We weren't finished yet. "I refuse to give up," I whispered, willing the light to stay strong as the dark began to encroach once more. What would come next? What more terrifying revelations awaited us in this unending battle against the Keeper of Shadows? The thought hung heavily in my mind as I stood at the precipice of the unknown, trapped in a train filled with darkness, yet yearning for the light we desperately sought. Behind us, the spirits glittered with hope, whispering their stories and encouragement, sweeter than the siren calls of those who had once lost their way. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. Would I have the courage to face whatever came next? Or would my fears drag me back into the shadows? A single thought caught in my throat. I had to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the journey ahead, and prepared to face the terrifying unknown that awaited us in the depths of the darkness. The Keeper might have been defeated for now, but I could sense the unearthly tension, a lingering dread. There were deeper horrors still waiting to be unearthed in the shadows. I stood there, my heart racing, feeling the air grow thin and heavy like smoke lingering after fire. The remnants of light flickered like dying embers around me, each pulse signaling the creeping return of darkness. As if sensing my fear, the shadows and corners of the train car thickened and twisted, swirling like a restless storm. I could see faces forming within the dark tendrils, ages of sorrow and rage melding into a cacophony of whispers that raised goosebumps on my arms. "Join us!" They seemed to hiss, the voices merging into one sinister chant, each syllable pulling at threads of my own memories. Against my will, I felt old fears creep back into my mind. echoes of moments when I felt small and powerless. The keeper's taunts replayed in my thoughts, his echoing voice making my resolve waver. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to focus on the warmth of the spirits and the power of our stories. Suddenly, when the shadows burst forth, a figure flickered into existence before me. A pale woman, her eyes hollow and sunken, her mouth a gruesome line twisted in anguish. "You cannot escape, child," she moaned, extending a bony hand toward me. "You are part of this nightmare now." I stumbled back, but then noticed that the spirits had come alive in defense, surrounding me in a protective circle, their soft light pushing against the encroaching darkness. "Stay back," I shouted, finding my voice again. "You have no power over us." The pale woman wailed, the sound a piercing shriek that reverberated through the train. It broke like glass in the still air, and for a moment, it was deafening. I could barely hear the whispers of the spirits as they chanted their words of strength around me, urging me not to surrender. But then, as the wailing subsided, I caught sight of something worse. Out of the shadows slithered figures I had never seen before, demanding and dark, their expressions twisted in various states of despair. They slinked across the floor like snakes, wrapping around each other in a grotesque dance, creating a blur of limbs and unsettling faces. The sight sent chills racing down my spine. "Help us," one of them pleaded, its voice a low, trembling murmur. "Remember your pain. Let it consume you." I reeled back, battling the urge to give in. With every ounce of resolve, I fought against their seductions. "No!" I screamed, clenching my fists, feeling the warmth of the spirit circle tighten around me. "I will not let your darkness take me." But as I shouted, the shadows seemed to pulse, feeding off my fear and anger, growing more tangible and solid. I realized that they were feeding off our emotions, our memories, our suffering. The darkness thrived in its twisted cycle. Suddenly, Tommy was beside me, his face pale but fierce. "We need to think of a way out," he urged, his eyes wide with determination and fear. "They feed on our doubts. We can't give them that." In that moment, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. I closed my eyes, visualizing the warmth of the spirits, the strength of their stories. I remember the moments of joy that had burned brightly in the midst of all this chaos. "Let's share our stories," I shouted. "Let's shine our light brighter than their darkness. We can overcome them." Tommy nodded, and together we began to speak, our voices connecting in a symphony of defiance. I recalled cherished memories of laughter with friends, the joy of summer nights under starry skies, and the warmth of being surrounded by loved ones. As our words filled the air, the shadows shrieked, their forms wavering, flickering like bad dreams confronted by daylight. I watched as the pale woman recoiled, her bony fingers curling back as if burned by our light. Then, the ground beneath us shook violently, and the train rattled as if responding to our outpouring of stories. I felt an unsettling presence, something far more powerful than before creeping into my senses. Something ancient, hungry, and malicious. The shadows grew bolder, drawing around us like a wave crashing against the shore. Shapes pushed through the dark, monstrous forms that twisted and swirled, their eyes like pits of despair, hunting for the energy we had awakened. I took a deep breath, swallowing down my fear. "Stay strong, everyone." I shouted again, knowing that we had to come together. We're not finished yet, not while we still have our stories. As I said this, the walls of the train quaked, and I could see cracks appearing, darkness spilling through, whispering secrets I didn't want to know. The whole train felt alive, a grotesque creature feeding on our emotions, and I could sense it searching for weakness. "Don't look away," Tommy yelled, his voice cracking but filled with resolve. "We will not be afraid." But the shadows were relentless. They coiled around us like snakes, hissing and taunting and unnerving, dissonant chords that grabbed at my thoughts, tugging at my sanity. The fear crept closer, slippery like oil, and just when I thought I was winning, the pale woman lunged at me again, this time with her hand outstretched, creating a sound in my head like that of breaking glass. "Join us," she screeched, her eyes glittering with a sickly light that didn't seem human anymore. "Drown in your fears, let it go. It's easy." That fear washed over me like a cold wave, washing away my memories, all the joy. It felt so comforting, so soothing, as if surrender would bring me peace from this nightmarish battle. I almost let myself slip. I could feel the cold fingers of despair clutching my throat. But then the spirits surged, wrapping around me, their shimmering form pulling me back from the brink. In that moment, I realized the truth. Fighting this darkness was not about banishing it entirely, but about wielding our light against it, holding tight to our stories no matter how hurt or scared. So, I dug deeper into my soul, tapping into the joy I had once thought lost. I thought of my family, the laughter that echoed through our home, the love that surrounded me. I pictured each moment vividly. The way the sun glimmered off the grass, the warmth of shared meals, the embrace of friends who cared. Gradually, the shadows slowed, the horrible faces faltering momentarily. The whispers became frantic cries as they struggled against the flood of warmth radiating from us. The collective light of our memories melded into a warm shield, pushing back harder than before. Just when I thought we might gain ground, the Keeper's voice broke through the darkness, cold and mocking. You cannot win. You think your stories can save you? All you're doing is feeding the abyss. The threat sent a fresh wave of fear through me, but at the same time, I felt the spirits rally, their determination rising. Together, we could push back against the overwhelming tide. Don't listen, I shouted, knowing I had to keep the momentum. Stay together. Our stories are stronger than his darkness. And as I called on memories of laughter and love, the shadows trembled, swirling angrily like a dying storm. But that swirling, grasping darkness wasn't finished yet. Something shifted in the air, and suddenly the shadows began to blend and separate, forming a ghastly new shape behind the Keeper, a creature that oozed malice, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. The Keeper smiled, a twisted grin that chilled me to the bone. I could see the thing was hungry for fear, drawing from the darkness, spilling into our shared space. It was bigger, more sinister, eyes gleaming with the promise of despair, reaching toward us with cold, clawed hands stretched wide. Embrace it, it hissed, the voice slithering into my mind like a worm through rotten wood. All your pain, your suffering, it will make you stronger with me. That thing loomed closer, and I felt terror clutching at the tendrils of my very essence. I glanced at Tommy and the spirits who surrounded me, and I realized I could not turn back. The weight of dread fought with the flickering lights of our stories, and I knew that it was now or never. Filled with fierce determination, I raised my voice higher than ever, a desperate plea echoing into the abyss. Our stories are our light. They define us. You will never take us. As if responding to my conviction, the spirits surged with me, their energies intertwining and exploding into radiant colors that met the oncoming abomination head-on. With a blinding flash, the air before me split and cracked, the darkness warping and twisting as our collective light pushed forward, a blinding tide against the looming shadows. I watched in a mix of fear and awe as that monstrous figure shrieked, its scream mingling with the Keeper's, both rasping wails merging into a dissonance of terror. The shadows recoiled, rippling and fading back as the light grew hotter, fighting to consume the dark once and for all. But as the bright burst of light crashed forward, I felt a deep chill on my skin, a bone-deep terror more powerful than fear. I turned, eyes widening, knowing I felt something darker lurking just beyond the edges of our light, waiting for its moment. What horrors awaited us just beyond the flickering brightness? And as the darkness fought and sputtered, it felt as if our fate hung by a thread, teetering on the edge of annihilation or salvation. My heart thudded heavily, and though I had never felt so afraid, I knew I would not give in. There was still one last story to tell, and this time we would intertwine them all, battling against the terrifying home of pain and despair that longed to consume us, determined to shine to the gathering shadows. The real fight had just begun. I felt a tremor in the ground beneath me, like the heartbeat of a beast awakening from a deep slumber, and I knew that whatever lay beyond the flickering light was preparing to pounce. The shadows shifted, creating rippling shapes that danced and twisted in a maddening rhythm. Each change aligned with the echo of my pounding heart. Clutching Tommy's arm, I could sense his fear, but I also felt his determination like an electric charge. We were standing on the precipice of something nightmarish, and though my pulse quickened, I forced myself to breathe. Awareness washed over me like cold water. This would be our darkest trial yet. The shadows whispered maliciously, their voices slithering like snakes through the air. "Let the light blind you," they seethed, "so you cannot see what lurks in the darkness." I looked around, trying to guess where the next blow would come from. That's when I noticed the figures in the back of the train car, the ones that seemed to be remnants of lost souls. Their faces were contorted, eyes wide with terror, mouths twisted in silent screams. Suddenly, the air turned icy, and I felt chills run down my spine. A low growl radiated from the depths of the shadowy mass, vibrating through the air and settling deep in my bones. I glanced at Tommy, who was frozen in fear, and I could feel panic tangling with my courage. "We have to fight back," I urged, steeling myself against the encroaching gloom. "We cannot let them win." With each step we took, the shadows followed us, curling around our legs like smoke. It felt like the very darkness was alive, hunting us, and I could taste the bitter tang of fear on my tongue. Each breath I took seemed to pull the energy from deep within me, and I fought against the suffocating weight of despair that threatened to pull me under. Suddenly, a shriek pierced through the darkness, loud and unearthly, echoing off the walls and settling into my bones. The pale woman appeared again, her eyes aflame with madness, her face twisted in anguish. Her fingers clawed at the air in desperation, demanding my gaze. "You think you can escape?" she shrilled, the shadows writhing around her like an angry serpent. "You belong to me. You are nothing without your fears." I could feel her hate. It seeped into my skin, tugging at all my insecurities and heartaches, trying to weave them into a tapestry of despair. She moved closer, her shadow stretching out toward me like an insidious tendril. Wanted to wrap around me, wanted to consume me. "No!" I shouted, fighting back the urge to succumb. "You don't owe me." I felt the light of the spirits flicker, pulsing like a heartbeat, as though they were responding to my defiance. Swelling with determination, I plunged forward, shouting the happiest memories I could summon, unwilling to let the darkness swallow my light. But the shadows were relentless. They surged forth, morphing into grotesque monsters, each more twisted than the last. They shackled my confidence, weaving through my thoughts and planting seeds of doubt. I could hear them whispering, taunting with voices that echoed my own fears. "Remember the times you failed. Remember the moments you hurt. Remember the day you lost everything." In that instant, the train car began to tremble, shaking violently as if reacting to the malevolent presence. The twisted faces in the shadows laughed, their voices shrill as they pushed against the light. I pressed my palms to my temples, trying to block out their relentless chant. "Let it go," they hissed. "Give in to the darkness. Just stop fighting." I felt the cold fingers of despair creep around my throat, squeezing tighter. I could feel Tommy's fear radiating toward me, and I knew I had to be the anchor. "Please, do not look into the darkness," I urged, gathering all my strength. "We can't let them win." I spat the words out like fire. With every heartbeat, I fought back against the oppressive weight, willing my thoughts to stay focused on the warmth of the spirits surrounding us. The scream of the pale woman grew louder, an unbearable sound that shattered the air like glass, as she was caught in the maelstrom of darkness that roiled around her. She writhed and cursed, her form shifting, blending into the shadows as she tossed her head back in anguished rage. But that moment of chaos ignited something deep in me. I felt the anger rise like a tide, fueled by the knowledge that I refused to be a vessel for despair. I drew upon memories that made me smile, friends gathering around a table, laughter spilling like light. The spirits responded, swirling with radiant energy, wrapping around us like a cocoon. "Don't listen to her," I called out, my voice cutting through the darkness. "Remember your joys. Remember why we fight." As the words left my mouth, the shadows recoiled slightly, writhing as if burned by the warmth that radiated from our memories. But we were met with stiff resistance. The monstrous forms around us began to roar, their voices blending into one deafening sound, drowning out my thoughts. They howled like a storm, clawing at the edges of my awareness. I felt dizzy, the world tilting as the pressure built around us. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing, but I forced myself to stabilize. Suddenly, flashes of horrifying moments filled my mind unbidden. My childhood nights spent trembling under the covers, afraid of the dark that whispered secrets from the corners of my room. I squeezed my eyes shut, determined to drive those thoughts away. I couldn't let them take me again. A cold wind howled through the cabin, extinguishing sections of light and plunging us into stifling darkness. The shadows shift more emphatically in that darkness, and I forced my eyes open, screaming into the void. No, we have not lost yet. And just as I channeled my focus toward a glimmer of hope, massive shadows surged toward me as one, a shapeless beast of despair, sweeping across the train car in a wave. I could see glimpses of faces, lost souls, trapped in the abyss, their expressions tangled with fear and desperation, reaching out for help, yet dragging me back into their torment. "Join us," they whispered in a chorus, their voices melding into an unnerving symphony of pain, wrapping around my heart like a noose. "We are your fears. We are your truth." At that moment, something deep inside me cracked, a wall of fear smashing down amidst the turmoil. I felt the truth of their words threatening to drown me. A wave of darkness surged forward, overwhelming and suffocating, and I gasped, feeling the weight of hopelessness bearing down. For a fleeting moment, I imagined the comfort of surrender. I could let go of the fight, submit to their powerful wills, and drift into a dreamless sleep. But a spark of defiance ignited in my chest, reminding me of the people I cared about, the warmth of belonging, the laughter that still echoed in my memories. In that chaos, I saw Tommy's resolve shining next to me. He wasn't giving in. He was still standing strong. I took a deep breath. We can't let them win. I shouted again, focusing all my energy into creating a bastion of light that surged between us and those shadowy figures. The darkness howled in frustration, the collective force pushing against our radiance, but I could feel it shifting, boiling under the heat of our memories. I recalled other moments of love, those fleeting instances of joy, and let them pour from my heart like a flame. I lifted my arms high, willing the spirits to come forth, to connect with our light. The darkness has no hold over us. I yelled, and with each repetition, I felt strength gathering, a tapestry of light woven from a weave of forgotten stories. It pushed against the shadows, feeling like a pulse, a heartbeat that synchronized with mine. But just as I thought our light might engulf the shadows, they erupted into a frenzied dance of terror. The beast lunged forward, swirling shadows reaching for my throat. With a sudden speed, it swept me off my feet, and I was lifted into the air. The cold grip of fear wrapped around me, tightening like a belt until I gasped for breath. "Give in," the shadows seethed. I could feel their icy breath on my skin, numbing my senses. I fought to keep from screaming as panic clawed at my chest, fighting against the encroaching darkness that sought to close in on me. I was teetering on the brink, the vast void beckoning me to join those who had surrendered before. But with a surge fueled by every bit of love I had within me, I recalled each memory, every glimmer of joy. I thought of family, friends, and laughter, reciting each joy as if it were a mantra, an armor I could wear against a terrible way of despair. "Remember who you are," I shouted, forcing my heart to stay open. And just as the monster drew closer, determined to pull me into its depths, I felt a sudden release, the pressure around my throat loosening. The darkness swirled. The beast let out a deafening roar that echoed through the cabin, flooding every crevice with sorrow and anguish as if it knew our light could break the chain binding it. The light intensified, and in that moment of connection between Tommy and me, the spirit surged forward, amplifying our strength. It glimmered white-hot, burning against the darkness, and suddenly, the air erupted with brilliant light, blinding in its clarity. The shadows screamed, twisting and writhing against the onslaught as their forms began to fragment and dissolve into nothingness, the darkness retreating like a tide. In the midst of that blinding storm, I held on with everything I had. I was fighting not just for myself, but for every lost soul that had ever been trapped in grief and darkness, for every story that deserved to live. And just as our light reached its peak, the keeper's horrid face burst forth from the darkness, shrieking in fury as if the very fabric of the night was unraveling beneath his wrath. "You cannot escape," he bellowed, stretching his arms wide as shadows desperately tried to reform around him. But I stood resolute, my heart hammering with defiance. "I choose to live," I shouted back, and swiftly, we thrust our light forward, aiming for the chilling darkness at the center of the storm, refusing to let fear dictate our fate any longer. The resonating energy intertwined with our memories, creating an explosion of warmth and brilliance, piercing right to the heart of the darkness. I could feel the last vestiges of despair unraveling, withering beneath the unyielding light, as I realized we might have a chance to break free. The Keeper howled one last time, enraged and powerless against our collective hope, and then a final flash of brilliance erupted, igniting the shadows in a blaze of purest light. All at once, the darkness shattered like fragile glass, a symphony of despair melting away into shimmering dust, scattering across the air like shooting stars. But as I blinked through the aftermath, a chilling echo still lingered behind, a promise that even if we had pushed back against that darkness, the shadows may forever remain, lurking patiently, waiting for the moment we may falter once more. With that thought heavy in my heart, I knew that our fight was far from over. I stood there, heart racing, as the last fragments of darkness faded into shimmering dust, scattering like ashes in the wind. But all around me, an eerie silence fell, thick and oppressive, a silence that felt weighty and cold. I sensed it. Something was still lingering in the depths of the shadows, something that hadn't been fully defeated. Tommy grabbed my arm, his grip tight. There was fear in his eyes, and I swallowed hard, knowing we still weren't free. The train car was eerily still now, yet the air crackled with an unsettling energy. I could feel something pressing against my chest, a horrible feeling that whispered to me in the silence. "You think you've won? You've only just begun." As we moved cautiously, I glanced around at the remnants of what we had just fought. A twisted wreck of darkness was now scattered about like remnants of a storm. But that sense of victory was short-lived. In the fragmented shadows, I could see movements, dark shapes slinking away, merging and blending together, becoming one once again. The thought chilled me to the bone. "Look out!" I shouted, instinctively pushing Tommy back as one of the remnants sprang forward, jagged teeth glimmering with an unnatural light, its breath a putrid mix of decay and despair. It lunged, a blur of darkness and malice. I felt a rush of cold air sweep past my face as the creature reached for me, a terrible hunger evident in its hollow eyes, a gaping chasm of nibbling void. I ducked, rolling to the side, narrowly avoiding its grasp. "Run!" I yelled, knowing we couldn't let it close the distance. We dashed down the aisle, the shadows roaring with provocations, furious at our defiance. An uneasy panic washed over me. The air was thick with tension, crackling with something sinister. I could hear the echoes of their howls behind us, a chorus of dread that vibrated through my bones, making my skin crawl. Desperation clawed at my throat as I guided Tommy toward the exit. But just as we approached, the train lurched violently, throwing us off balance. I turned to see a dark shape forming behind us, a swirling mass of shadow congealing into an enormous figure. It towered above us, eyes smoldering like dying coals, and I felt the ground beneath me tremble in response to its might. "No!" I whispered, the word barely able to escape my lips. The Keeper's face materialized amidst the shadows, mocking and grotesque, and I could see the cold satisfaction in his twisted grin. "You think you sent me away? I am always with you. I am your past, your fears. I will never leave." I turned to Tommy, fear reflected in his wide eyes. I couldn't let myself be trapped by his words. "We have to push through," I insisted. "Fight. Remember our light." But even as I said it, doubt crept into my heart, and I felt the warmth of courage wavering. The ground shook again, and suddenly the air around us stirred, thick with whispers. I strained to make out the words that swirled like a thick fog, each one tugging at my mind. "Join us!" They cooed, sweet and sinister. "Embrace the darkness." I felt their pull almost physically, a longing to give in, to rest beneath the suffocating shadows. But a flicker of light surged within me, an ember refusing to die. I could hear the laughter of friends, the warmth of home, the memories tugging at me like a lifeline. No! I shouted, breaking the trance they tried to weave. I will not surrender. Gathering all my strength, I held my ground, envisioning that embrace of light forming a barrier around me and Tommy. Fight with me? I urged, and I could see him gather his resolve. Together, we pushed against that seductive, suffocating darkness. As we channeled our combined memories, fragments shimmering like stars, I felt the power soar between us. The shadows shrieked, twisting and writhing, their forms scorching and unstable against our light. We had to concentrate, to claw our way back from the abyss, and I could feel my heart sinking with Tommy's as we created that radiance that emanated from our hopes. The keeper lunged forward, his laughter echoing off the walls, but with every ounce of strength, I repelled him. I wouldn't back down. We are not alone, I shouted, holding my ground against his wicked grin. In that instant, the light flared brilliantly, carving to the darkness, illuminating every corner of that train car. But as the brilliance surged, the shadows responded. They rushed back, coiling around us like serpents, their grip tightening with malevolent intent. You can't escape, they howled. As the wave of darkness crashed against our light, I felt an excruciating pressure. Shadows trying to smother every spark of warmth, attempting to erase us. My heart raced, and in the chaos, I felt the overwhelming swell of fear wrap around my throat. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The darkness pressed down, more suffocating than ever before. With every second, it felt like I was losing ground, losing hope. The shadows darted closer, a legion of despair demanding my surrender. But within that collapsing weight, a final memory surged. They were laughter of friends and family circling around me, all those moments of pure joy that fortified my heart against the horrors of the night. With one final push, I directed that light toward the heart of the shadows, letting it blaze forth like a wildfire. The creatures screeched, thrashing and twisting in agony as our combined warmth ignited the darkness. The keeper's face twisted in furious disbelief, the shadows boiling around him, fracturing, struggling against our radiant force. "No!" he screamed, his voice splitting my eardrums. "It cannot end like this." But I refused to back down. I could feel the warmth of hope filling the air, pushing through the shadows like a dawn breaking through the night. The chains of despair splintered around us, and just when I thought we might escape, I caught the glint of something sinister in the chaos. One last figure coiling behind the keeper, shimmering with darkness. In the blink of an eye, it struck towards me, a clawed hand reaching out in desperation. The air chilled, and I staggered back but didn't falter. "We will not fear you," I roared, and all at once, the light erupted, embracing every shadow around us. The darkness whirled and shrieked, but the weight of our memories clashed with theirs, creating brightness beyond comprehension. It rippled through the cabin, pushing back against the creatures, forcing them to scatter like ash in the wind. With every ounce of courage, I thrust forward, knowing I had to fight until the very end. As the room faded into brilliant light, I felt relief wash over me. The keeper's screams echoed, a sound that pierced a veil of darkness and reverberated in my soul, a reminder that he would forever linger in my thoughts, reminded me that shadows can sneak in at any moment. But for now, I was free. I could feel the emptiness start to lift, replaced by the warmth of hope that wrapped around me like a blanket. As I turned to Tommy, breathless and alive, we shared a moment of understanding, a quiet vow that though darkness can come, together we would always rise in defiance. Even as the shadows melted away, I knew that the darkness would always be waiting, an ever-looming presence in periphery of my mind, whispering, sometimes begging me to slip back into an embrace. But with that intention in my heart, I would remain steadfast, knowing that our light was flaming bright and impossible to extinguish. It wasn't just a battle against wickedness. It was a testament of our bond, reminding me that sometimes standing against the dark is where we discover our greatest strength. It was never just about my fears. It was about the memories and loved ones that defined who I really am. As the final threads of darkness disappeared into the ether, I stepped out into the unsettling chill of night, aware of my vulnerability, yet empowered by the truth of my journey. The darkness might always echo in my mind, but I knew, for as long as I held on to my light, I could face anything that dare to come next.